Do this question on your own before you look at the video solution. Okay. Proponents of the recently introduced tax on sales. Okay, so proponents of these tax, which is a recently introduced tax on sales of new luxury boats. Okay, so we have introduced a new tax that's going to apply on sales of new luxury boats. If you buy a new luxury boat, you're going to pay a new tax now. And the proponents of this tax had argued that a talk, sorry, that a tax of this sort would be an equitable way. So this kind of tax would be an equitable way to increase government revenue. Okay, why is this an equitable way to increase government revenue? Because the admittedly heavy tax burden, okay, whatever the tax burden, right? Some people are going to pay this tax, so it's going to be a burden on them. This burden would fall only on wealthy people. Okay, so these proponents are thinking that uh, this is a equitable way to increase government revenue, this tax, because these wealthy people, only wealthy people buy these luxury boats. This is what they are thinking, right? And so just these wealthy people are going to pay this heavy tax burden. So yeah, it's a equitable way because the poor people are not paying these taxes. So it's equitable because you are taxing people who can afford to pay. And it's saying neither they nor anyone else would suffer any economic hardship. So these wealthy people would not suffer any economic hardship because they have a lot of money. That's what these guys are arguing. Okay. And then anyone else would also not suffer because we are just taxing new luxury boats, and only according to these guys, only wealthy people are buying these luxury boats. So why would anybody else suffer economic hardship if we are just introducing a tax on luxury boats? In fact, however, okay, so there is a contrast here. 20% of the workers employed by manufacturers of luxury boats, okay, 20% of the workers who are employed by manufacturers of luxury boats have lost their jobs as a direct result of this tax. Okay, so 20% of the workers have lost their jobs as a result of this tax. Why would that happen? Think about it. Probably because there has been a decline in sales, right? If you increase taxes on something, at least some people who would have otherwise bought may not buy, right? So that might lead to a decline in sales, and since there is a decline in sales, there is a decline in demand. So the manufacturers may also start producing a smaller amount. In that case, they may end up hiring people who are employed with them. Okay, so that could explain why, probably, right, why 20% of the workers have lost their jobs as a result of this tax. Now, why is there, however, here? The reason is because in the last line, the proponents argued that nobody would suffer any economic hardship. Wealthy people would also not suffer, nor anyone else, right? So, according to them, nobody would suffer any economic hardship. On the other hand, this statement says actually 20% of the workers have lost their jobs. They are suffering economic hardship as a result of this tax. So, that's why there is a contrast here. Okay, so these are the two statements given to us. First is what the proponents are arguing, and second is a given fact by the author that actually 20% of workers employed by these manufacturers have lost their jobs as a result of this tax. Okay, the information given, if true, so both of these statements are true, most strongly support which is the following. So it's an inference question. The market for luxury boats would have collapsed. The market would have collapsed even if the new tax had been lower. So it looks like, given the word heavy, that it was quite a lot of tax. uh, and now option A is saying the market would have collapsed even if the tax had been lower. Now, has the market collapsed? Um, Again, it seems so that the market has gone down. That's why the workers are getting fired. Uh, but here it is saying the market would have collapsed even if the tax had been lower. We don't know even right now whether the how much the market has collapsed, whether the market has collapsed, or the manufacturers have started expecting future orders to be less. Uh, we don't know whether the market has collapsed. And even if the market has collapsed, we don't know whether the market would collapse even if the tax had been lower. So this is something we cannot say at all. Option B, it's a long statement, so it's very important to understand it. The new tax, the new tax would produce a net gain. The new tax is this recently introduced tax on sales of luxury boats. This new tax would produce a net gain in tax revenue for the government. Okay, it would produce a net gain. It would produce a net gain in tax revenue for the government only if the yearly total revenue that it generates, it would refer to the new tax, only if the yearly total revenue that the new tax generates exceeds the total of any yearly tax revenue decrease. Okay, so this entire thing is the condition that if the total revenue that the new tax generates exceeds the total of any yearly total revenue decrease. So if there is a decrease in tax revenue resulting from the workers' loss of jobs, so why would there be a tax revenue decrease? Probably if they are employed, they are paying some taxes, right? Probably income taxes. So now they are not going to pay taxes because they are unemployed. So there might be, it's just saying total of any decrease. So even if there is a decrease, there may not be any decrease because they may end up getting something else, some other job. But if there is a decrease, if we total all that decrease of tax revenue resulting from the workers' loss of job, which is essentially a direct result of this tax. Okay, so that would lead to a tax revenue decrease, and there is a tax revenue that we are getting by the new tax, this tax on luxury boats. So so if the revenue that the new tax generates exceeds this decrease, so let's say the new tax generates for us 100 rupees, but since workers are losing jobs, so they are not going to pay, let's say, income taxes. So whatever the decrease is, we don't know if there is any decrease, but let's say whatever the decrease is, let's say that is 80. Okay, so then overall there is a net gain from the new tax because 100 rupees is we are gaining from the new tax and 80 rupees we are losing as a result of workers losing their jobs. So overall there is a net gain. So it's saying there the new tax will produce a net gain only if this happens, which means if let's say this happens that it gets us 100 rupees but the worker's job leads to a decline in revenue of 120 rupees, in that case actually there will not be a net gain because of the new tax, which makes sense, right? Of course there would be a net gain only if this amount exceeds this amount, and we already know that both of these are potentially there, so it's a sensible statement. So B is a potential answer. C, because many people never buy luxury items. Okay, because many people never buy luxury items. Okay, imposing a sales tax on luxury items is the kind of legislative action that does not cost incumbent legislators much popular support. It does not cost much popular support means they don't end up losing a lot of support by introducing this kind of tax on luxury items because not many people buy these luxury items. So if you impose a tax on these luxury items, not many people get impacted, so they don't really lose a lot of support, which is a sensible statement to make in general. But uh, even in this case, it does not look so sensible because you have introduced this tax on luxury boats, and because of that 20% of the workers have ended up losing their jobs, right? Now you may end up losing the popular support of these 20% of the workers because these are getting negatively impacted, right? So this is not even in line with what is given to us. This is definitely out. Before the tax was instituted, okay, before this tax was instituted, luxury boats were largely bought by people who were not wealthy. Okay, before the tax, actually these boats were bought by people, largely bought by people who were not wealthy. Actually, this is a very popular option. A lot of people mark this option D. And I was surprised why people mark option D, but then I thought about it, went through the forum, and probably understood that essentially when people look at this, they think, okay, if before the tax was instituted, luxury boats were bought by people who are not wealthy. Oh, so if they were not wealthy and if you tax them, then they're not going to buy because they don't have enough wealth, right? They can't pay you taxes on top of what they're already paying for the boat because they are not wealthy. So they'll not end up buying. And as a result of that, a lot of people will lose their jobs. Oh, this can actually help us explain why a lot of people are losing their jobs. So this is the kind of reasoning that I think people have. Probably there might be other kinds of reasoning also for selecting D. But the fundamental problem in this reasoning is that you're trying to explain why workers are losing job. You're trying to explain the last statement, or you're trying to explain this contrast. But nobody asks you to do that. The question is not asking you to resolve the paradox or explain why a lot of people are losing their jobs. The question is information given above, if true, if everything is true, what can we be sure about? It supports which of the following. How can we say that these were bought by people who are not wealthy? Why can't isn't it entirely possible that luxury boats were bought all of the luxury boats were bought by wealthy people? Isn't it possible? Right? Even if they were all wealthy, still if you introduce a tax, some of them may not buy. Right? They may buy something else. Right? They may buy a plane or something. We don't know, but they may not buy it at all. Even if they are wealthy, right? If you introduce taxes, it's not that "Okay, I have a lot of money, so you can tax me anything. I'll still buy the things that I want to buy." Right? So it is right entirely possible that these luxury boats were bought by people who were wealthy. Still, all the points make sense, right? So, on the basis of these facts, we cannot say that they were bought by people who are not wealthy. No, it is entirely possible that all of them were really wealthy. So, this is out. Option E, taxes can be equitable. So, it's not talking about what does it take to make the taxes equitable. Taxes can be equitable only if their burden, there is referring to taxes, only if the taxes burden is evenly distributed over the entire population. So they can be equitable only if the burden is evenly distributed. First of all, it's not in line with what proponents are arguing. They're arguing, let's make the burden go on the shoulders of the wealthy people, and that's an equitable way, right? They're not asking to evenly distribute the taxes on the over the entire population. So this statement is actually going against what proponents are arguing. So definitely this cannot be the answer. Cool. So option B is the answer.